Imagine stepping onto a new world Argus V.
Yeah.
The colonists, they had all this hope. They quickly dubbed it Treetrunk.
Right. And it wasn't some paradise planet. It was chilly, with these massive ice caps locking up most of the water.
So limited oceans, but it had this huge temperate belt, right, covered in what our sources call these Earth-like pseudo-evergreens. It was just full of potential.
It was. The sources describe it as being better than the colony on Proikon, which was already established. But they're also clear to point out it was definitely not a new Riviera.
No, it was rugged. But it was becoming home. I mean, 600,000 souls, rapidly growing population, looking for a fresh start. And then one day, just silence.
And we're not talking about a comms glitch. This was an absolute instantaneous blackout. No beacon response from any of the orbital satellites, no background static, no chatter, nothing.
It's the ultimate contradiction, isn't it? A world that's buzzing with peaceful, optimistic life, only to be just swallowed by this void. A void that signaled, well, total and focused annihilation.
That's the perfect word for it,
Yeah.
focused.
Okay, so let's unpack this moment, because that chilling absence of chatter is really the definitive starting point for this whole deep dive.
It has to be.
Our mission today is to trace this tragedy, a first contact failure of really epic proportions that completely rewired humanity's understanding of its place in the galaxy.
And show how it forced us into one of the most unlikely, and you could argue most essential military alliances we have ever forged.
We have a pretty deep stack of material for this one. It chronicles everything from that first hopeful survey mission on Treetrunk right through the shock of its discovery and then into the brutal interstellar war that came after.
It's really a profound study in strategic misjudgment. I mean, how humans were so immediately drawn to this superficial perfection, only to completely overlook the methodical, reliable partnership that was waiting right there in the wings.
And that's why the narrative of Treetrunk's early days is so critical here. It just sets the stage perfectly for the deception to come.
A world that promised safety and prosperity, it drew a massive influx of settlers in, what, just a few years?
Exactly. And the fact that it wasn't some resource-rich strategic prize, that almost made it feel safer, like it was less likely to be a target for any of the known enemies.
Benign, yeah.
So our sources, they open with that initial survey team, a small crew deployed for about 2 months to catalog the life and potential.
And we get to meet this core trio. First, there's Kairuna, who's the thoughtful botanist. She's clearly just thrilled by the planet's unique ecology.
Yeah, she's noting things like dull yellow slugs spitting cerise silk. She's the one who confidently predicts a huge colonization success.
Then you've got Idar, the census taker. He comes across as, well, argumentative, but he's also fiercely enthusiastic about the potential bonuses that the planet's success would bring them.
He's the pragmatist.
Right, and then there's the character who, in hindsight, holds the key to all of this, Alwyn.
Alwyn, the support specialist. He is introduced as being defined by his constant carping, bitching, and deep-seated xenophobia. He's the cruise cynic.
And his core belief, his whole worldview, was that the galaxy was, and I'm quoting here, vast, unfriendly, dangerous.
While everyone else was seeing this grand opportunity, Alwyn was just seeing the inevitable threat lurking in the shadows.
And for 60 days, it seems like he's wrong. They just catalog the environment, encounter only manageable, non-hostile indigenous life. It's all going perfectly.
But then they're back at their lander, the Chagos, and they're debating something totally mundane, like the government's bonus payout structure. And that's when the mundane is just shattered by the cosmic.
The sources describe a sound, an insistent, resonant, unforgettable howl coming from the Chagos.
And Kairuna, she knows it immediately. It's not a specific threat alert. It's the general alert wail.
Which means what exactly?
It means an unknown arrival in orbit, something that can't be classified by any known transponder signature. It's the sound that signals the beginning of the end of, really, human complacency in the galaxy.
Okay, so once that alarm sounds, the immediate priority for the crew of the Chagos is triage. Who isn't this? They have to run through the whole list of known stellar powers.
First on the list, the Thranx. They were, despite a lot of popular human prejudice, our only developing relationship at the time.
Intelligent, insectoid, which led to them being disparagingly called bugs or roaches by the xenophobes.
But they were known to be pacific, methodical, and really dedicated to a cautious, slow, diplomatic development that had been going on for 30 years.
Yeah, the relationship was always slow going, and it was almost entirely because of that overwhelming bias rooted in their physical appearance.
One of the sources has this great wry line. It just says, nobody wanted a date with the Thranx.
And that says it all, really. Still, they were strategically important. They'd provided schematics detailing the known threat, the AN. But this ship in orbit, it was definitely not Thranx.
So what about the AN? They were also ruled out pretty quickly.
Right. The AN were the established enemy, a militaristic reptilian species engaged in what the sources call a deliberate dance of disharmony with the Thranx.
And that had been going on for, what, 350 years?
Over 3.5 centuries. It wasn't an all-out hot war, but this persistent low-grade campaign of skirmishes and occasional depredations.
So you'd think they would be the prime suspect for any random attack.
You would, but two things argued against it. First, their ships were known to be bulky, heavy, not sleek, like this new arrival.
And second, the planet itself.
Exactly. Argus V itself was the best defense against that theory. The reptilian AN need a much drier, warmer environment.
Treetrunk, with its cold climate and massive ice caps, would have been totally useless to them. It held no strategic or even biological appeal.
Which left the surveying team facing this terrifying void. An utterly unknown, very sophisticated ship had just appeared in their sky.
And this arrival was immediately unsettling. The ship was sleek, clearly advanced, and just completely unresponsive.
They threw everything at it, right?
Everything. Standard terrain glow, high Thranx, low Thranx, even foundational mathematical theorems.
Which is usually the universal language for first contact.
Usually, but not this time. The only thing the communications officer, Tambry, could pick up was that the unknowns were chattering noisily among themselves.
So they were communicative, just not with us. They were deliberately isolating the newcomers.
And they didn't wait around in high orbit. They launched a smaller, winged shuttle directly towards the survey camp.
And the sources note the formality of the descent. The lack of any aggressive maneuvers was, in itself, deceptive.
And here is where human psychology just failed. Completely. The beings who emerged from that shuttle, the beings who called themselves the Pitar, were the exact opposite of the ugly insectoid Thranx.
They caused what's described as a uniform gasp from all the assembled humans.
They were nitrox breathers, which is, common enough. But they were wearing this lightweight, shimmering fabric, no visible headgear, no protective gear at all. They looked completely at ease.
The physical description. It's like they walked out of a Renaissance fresco. Humanoid to a remarkable degree. They had an Olympian physique, perfect posture, these sculpted faces, and striking amethystine eyes.
Shimmering, incredibly glamorous, that's the quote.
And the source material is very clear about this. This wasn't just, oh, they're attractive. It was overwhelmingly reassuring. Their symmetry, their perfect presentation, it just short-circuited all human caution.
Minister Salwafata, who later handled the formal diplomacy, was reportedly just mesmerized by their voice and their appearance.
All those warnings that Alwyn had internalized about the vast, unfriendly galaxy were just instantly forgotten.
Because, well, these aliens looked like us, only better.
And that fascination gave the Pitar an immediate, massive diplomatic advantage. They said they were from the nearby dominion of the Twin Worlds, but weren't native to Argus V.
And their initial conduct was, on the surface, flawless. They were incredibly cooperative.
Willingly providing blood and tissue samples, readily agreeing to medical checks, and they posed no medical threat.
They even volunteered to return to Earth on the Chagos to formalize relations. It was the perfect first contact.
Almost. Unsettlingly perfect. They offered information that was precisely calibrated to make them appear friendly and benign.
But this perfection raised immediate red flags for one party.
Of course, the Thranx. Counselor Humanx-Pitar, operating on a completely different set of cultural standards based on rigorous methodology and caution, immediately noted that the Pitar were reluctant to disclose much about themselves.
Right, to the Thranx, this wasn't shyness, it was deliberate opacity.
But the human media, utterly captivated by their appearance, they ran with it. They immediately branded the Pitar as shy and bashful, giving them a complete pass on their secrecy.
It was a projection of innocence based entirely on physical attractiveness.
The Thranx view was so much more analytical. Humanx-Pitar stated the Pitar were simply more cautious because of their own history with the AN. This implies a strategic awareness, not innocence.
And that just highlights the critical human bias here. An irrational, deep-seated attachment to physical appearance, where beauty is equated with goodness and reliability.
Meanwhile, the methodologically sound insectoid Thranx were just relegated to the diplomatic background.
It's a profound sociological lesson right there. The Pitar knew exactly how to play the human species. Their biological proximity to the human form was weaponized from the very first minute.
So the arrival of the Pitar, led by these representatives Slawet and Kubaku, it just immediately relegated human-Thranx relations to the slow track.
All diplomatic energy, all media focus, it just shifted entirely to the glamorous newcomers.
And the Pitar then cemented that advantage with a display of, well, breathtaking unconditional benevolence. It defied all known interstellar negotiating tactics.
The human diplomats, people like Minister Salwafada, they arrived expecting these lengthy, difficult negotiations over settlement rights on Treetrunk.
And instead, the Pitar offered this stunning immediate concession.
They immediately and unconditionally granted settlement rights to humans. No compensation. Zero.
No trade credits, no resources, no future concessions. They just claimed their population was stable and happy on the twin worlds, and Treetrunk was too cold and too barren for them.
They said they simply wanted to see their friends and close relations settle and enjoy the planet.
And that was psychological gold. It just stunned the human negotiators. Hudum, one of the undersecretaries, was so flustered, he just blurted out, no compensation at all.
The sources really imply that this was so far outside the realm of expected interstellar negotiation that it just completely disarmed the human side.
You have to analyze this strategy.
Yeah.
Why this level of altruism? It was calculated bait.
Of course. By granting everything unconditionally, they established this foundation of profound, unquestioning human trust.
It removed any possible pretext for human skepticism. It allowed them to appear as the perfect neighbors, interested only in human happiness and settlement.
And they reinforced that trust constantly. They often visited Treetrunk, appearing in their sleek shuttles to offer quiet, unsolicited assistance to small municipalities that were struggling with local conditions.
They proved vital in overcoming some really challenging environmental problems, which contrasted so sharply with the Thranx.
The Thranx, who were criticized for wanting to follow procedure in all things.
Right. They often required weeks of paperwork before offering aid. The Pitar were flashy, quick, and glamorous. The Thranx were slow, methodical, and, well, bugs.
So while all of human attention was captivated by this Pitar perfection, the Thranx were struggling, not just against measured indifference from the human government, but also active opposition from the malcontents back on Earth.
And that indifference, sadly, it culminated in the Amazon hive attack.
This was just a horrifying act of domestic xenophobia, a fringe element of armed, camouflage-painted human fanatics expressly opposed to the human Thranx rapprochement.
They successfully infiltrated a Thranx colony hive deep in the Amazon jungle. Their whole objective was media exposure, and the chaos that resulted was exactly what they wanted.
The sources detail this tragic loss of life. Ajami Lafira, a human representative to the World Council, was trying to protect the Thranx counselor Hakfu Predek when both of them were killed by a staccato of gunfire.
The xenophobes were armed, but they weren't trained soldiers. The close confines of the hive actually worked against them. It was a strategic nightmare for them.
And the Thranx, they had no weapons in the hive. They defended themselves with desperate courage, using tools, even kitchen implements. But many perished.
And other humans who were working or studying there, they died right alongside them.
The attack was appalling, but the aftermath, it really revealed the underlying strength of the human-Thranx connection, at least at the diplomatic level.
The fanatics got their notoriety, but the majority human response was one of profound apology and deep embarrassment. It was a recognition of the depravity of attacking allies on their own soil.
And it was here, in the records of the communications leading up to the attack, that we see this subtle but profound linguistic shift that had been happening.
The dialogue between Ajami and Hakfu Predek, which was reviewed post-mortem, it highlighted the maturation of what they called Simbo speech.
Tell us more about Simbo speech. This wasn't just, learning each other's language, was it?
No, not at all. It was a joint manner of speaking that had evolved organically between them. It incorporated Thranx clicks and whistle sounds most humans couldn't naturally produce as these linguistic shortcuts.
So the human participants, through intense study of high Thranx, they could use these auditory cues to convey really complex human phrases or intentions.
Exactly. Instantly communicating concepts like absolute sincerity of purpose or unconditional trust in a way that just saying the phrase in triangle never could.
It matured into something really significant, but because it was used mostly in these niche diplomatic and scientific circles, it remained largely unnoticed by the general population.
But it showed a deep mutual cultural investment was happening under the surface.
And that shared trauma in the hive, it also led to a completely unexpected spiritual connection.
Right, Father Piro, a military chaplain who was actually mildly claustrophobic. He finds himself lost in these fume-filled hive tunnels, and he's bestowing last rites on both human and Thranx dead.
The sources note he was even forced to kill an armed xenophobe in self-defense, an act that clearly just shook his faith to its absolute core.
And while he's dealing with the emotional and spiritual fallout of all that violence, Piro meets Shanvortisep, a Thranx priest, or a Day Ain't.
And Pierrot is immediately surprised that the Thranx even have a formalized religion.
And Shanvortisep, for his part, was dissatisfied with the ancient Thranx religious order. He felt they couldn't keep pace with new revelations, specifically the discovery of other intelligent species. He saw the old ways as stagnant.
So what followed was weeks of this intense, high-level theological discussion. This wasn't superficial stuff. They were exploring mutual beliefs, shared ethical frameworks, and addressing fundamental existential questions.
And they acknowledged the differences, of course,
Yeah.
like the treatment of the dead. The Thranx, for ecological and cultural reasons tied to the Great Hive, they recycled bodies immediately.
Whereas humans insisted on slower decomposition and specific burial rites.
But they agreed on the essence of spiritual significance. And this reinforced Pyro's faltering faith and allowed him to enlighten Shanvortisep on the nuances of human spirituality. The key takeaway was that this profound spiritual connection, it transcended species and physical form and funerary customs.
It's incredible. In the midst of this burgeoning interstellar conflict, these two were figuring out how to apply insubstantialities to reality, as the source puts it. They decided to create a real-world manifestation of their shared faith.
They sought sponsorship for a revolutionary interspecies religious venue. And the plan was truly progressive. It was a place open not just to human and Thranx believers, but to members of any species, even avowed atheists. It was intended as a center for existential discourse.
And who steps up to fund this deeply spiritual project?
Martine Hertzelt-Lorengo, a wealthy, avowed atheist industrialist who had lost her husband and daughter in a plane crash 11 years prior. It's the ultimate cynical patronage.
Her motivation is just fascinating. She wasn't seeking enlightenment or some spiritual return on investment.
No, she was motivated by the need for amusement and a diversion. She openly called their proposal numinous folly, but she was curious enough about the concept to bankroll the entire mission.
She had this quote that madness needs to remain insular or it becomes hostage to reality and loses its charm.
Her cold, secular curiosity provided the necessary resources for this interspecies bridge to be built. It just proves that a lasting partnership can be built on mutual understanding, even if one partner is motivated purely by intellectual diversion rather than actual faith.
And the contrast is just so clear. The Thranx alliance was being built brick by careful brick through shared language, shared tragedy, shared metaphysical questions, while the Pitar alliance was already being taken for granted, built on absolutely nothing but a beautiful lie.
So we jump forward 4 years. Treetrunk's population has now hit 600,000 colonists. It's a huge success story.
And then a man named Trelonov, captain of a deep space cargo carrier, arrives in orbit. He's expecting standard beacon responses, communications traffic.
And he found what we started with, absolute baffling silence.
His initial reaction and that of his crew was, it must be a technical failure. But his communications officer, a man named Meeker, was deeply unsettled. He says, 1 satellite down, okay. 2 maybe? 3, never.
All 3 satellites were dead. No chatter, no background static, no response from the wheeled shuttle port. The planet was, from a communication standpoint, dead.
Chernoff correctly concludes this had to be deliberate suppression, not an accident. He leads a landing party down to the main settlement, Wheeled.
And the destruction they found was highly selective, but executed with this terrifying efficiency.
The 2 landing strips were destroyed. The city center, the administration block, was just a silent crater of fused glass.
The intersystem communication shaft was a similar pit. The perpetrators had surgically struck the 2 points necessary to blind and isolate the colony from both internal and external communication.
And from rescue.
But the true magnitude of the horror was found in the sheer totality of the genocide. They searched Wheeled, they searched the other big town, Chagos Downs, and they found no survivors.
The source material delivers this detail with such cold clinical precision. The colonists were slaughtered where they had been found, attempting to surrender lying in bed, slumped over instruments.
From the eldest patient to the youngest infant, no one had been spared.
It wasn't a plague. It wasn't a native uprising, it was the result of advanced killing technology applied ruthlessly and comprehensively. The scale of the violence suggested an enemy who viewed these 600,000 humans not as opponents, but as a liability to be erased.
But there was one man, saved by his own paranoia, Alwyn Mallory.
The xenophobe from the original survey team. He'd settled on Treetrunk under the name Alwyn Mallory, working in this isolated camouflage shop, and he was tinkering with an old surplus freighter-class lifeboat he had bought years ago, purely on a whim.
His xenophobia, his ingrained belief that the galaxy was dangerous, it actually saved his life. When he saw the smoke and heard the recurrent booms, he immediately recognized they were extra-atmospheric explosive being guided from orbit.
His strategic cynicism just kicked right in. He knew the AN were unlikely because of the climate, and the Thranx were, at worst, procedural slowpokes, not genocidal invaders.
Crucially, his old communications console, the very antique equipment he was probably tinkering with, that was his lifeline. He managed to pick up a data signal from a lone, orphaned mobile media remote.
So, like a news drone.
Basically, yeah. A little floating camera that was programmed to film events in Wheels Central Plaza,
Yeah.
and despite all the destruction, it was still following its basic instructions.
And the footage it transmitted was the definitive, sickening revelation. It showed armored figures and a large vehicle unloading bodies.
And all the bodies were female, aged approximately 14 to 40.
And Mallory watched this unspeakable act unfold. The figures carefully and efficiently sliced into the abdomen and removed, insofar as he was able to tell, the complete set of female reproductive organs. Uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, everything.
They were immediately transferred to cryogenic containers, and the gaping wounds were just left open.
This detail is so paramount. This wasn't collateral damage. This was surgical strategic harvesting. The sources insist on this specific detail because it entirely changes the motive for the attack, from a resource war to something biological, calculated.
And the cold efficiency was confirmed when one of the eviscerated women twitched, tried to sit up, and was immediately shot. They were just eliminating variables.
And then the ultimate reveal. Two of the exonerators removed their helmets.
They were Pitar.
The glamorous, unconditionally generous Pitar were the calculating monsters behind the destruction of Treetrunk. They had acted with this chilling precision, knowing exactly what to target first communications, shuttle ports, to ensure no one could interfere with their primary objective.
The theft and preservation of human female reproductive capacity.
Mallory knew they would be systematically eliminating any trace, any survivor. His escape plan was born of pure desperation and his intimate knowledge of that old life raft.
He achieved liftoff at a perpendicular angle, not a standard flight path, on the opposite side of the planet from the attacking armada, relying on Treetrunk's mass to shield his unauthorized launch from detection.
But his real genius was the evidence. Before leaving, he didn't just remember the footage, he retrieved the recording unit. He snatched the small Mollysphere recording unit from that media remote.
And for you, the learner, a Mollysphere is a specific type of highly durable miniature data recorder. They're often used for deep space diagnostics because they're so resilient and can store massive amounts of data in a tiny volume.
And the sphere contained the incontrovertible proof of Pitarian perfidy.
Mallory somehow survived for 3 months alone on Treetrunk's inner moon, Treetrunk 1. He did it mostly by conserving air and just living in his suit.
He was eventually found by a passing Unapatha ship.
The Unapatha are a fascinating species, sort of in the galactic background. They're timid, non-threatening, and their only defense, ironically, relies on their transparent helplessness.
So they find Mallory's lifeboat, they see this human screaming, exhibiting extreme distress, and they're afraid he's going to hurt himself.
So rather than try to handle this volatile survivor themselves, they alert the human military cruiser, the Ronin.
Upon rescue, Mallory was comatose, suffering from severe trauma. When he finally stabilized, he only responded to his real name, Alwyn Mallory, having reverted past his settled alias.
And his story, recounting the invasion, the genocide, and the female reproductive organ evisceration and theft, it was immediately met with deep skepticism.
Of course it was. Military intelligence, led by Major Rothenberg, and the psych team, including a Colonel Nedorovina, they found the story unbelievable.
They thought it was a classic trauma-induced delusion that he was masking a worse reality. Maybe he killed people himself or just succumbed to madness out there.
The idea that this perfect, beautiful race would commit genocide purely for biological harvest just made no sense to strategists who were fixated on traditional motives like resources or territory.
The Pitar were too cooperative, too perfect to be monsters.
So Colonel Nedrina decides to test his sanity. She confronts him with a live Pitar diplomat, Demisitel, who had been detained after the blackout.
Genocidal maintains this faultless, calm demeanor and calls Mallory delusional and imaginative. The expectation was that Mallory would just break down, spiral into violence, and prove his instability.
But the test did the complete opposite. Mallory reacted not with panic, but with this controlled, focused fury. He looks Demisitel right in the eye and states, "I want to know all about the Pitar because it will help me to understand how better to kill you."
That composure and that absolute commitment to vengeance rather than pure terror, that's what convinced the military and psychiatric personnel that he wasn't mad. He was a witness to an incomprehensible horror.
So the final piece of the puzzle was the proof. Mallory remembered hiding the Molly sphere marker rock on the inner moon. The search was intense, complicated by the low gravity and the dust that had been blasted up from the previous recovery ships.
After this massive, high-tech effort by specialists looking for this tiny piece of hardware, the Molly sphere was finally found. Not by a search drone or a seasoned veteran.
No, by a junior ensign. It had somehow bounced or been misplaced, and was discovered casually in the cafeteria, resting between a sandwich and a salad.
You really couldn't ask for a more fittingly ironic contrast, could you? The magnitude of the horror and the sheer dumb luck of its recovery.
So with the Molly sphere recovered, the evidence was beyond dispute. Diplomat Herringale was tasked with delivering the horrific news. He presents the recording to the Pitarian ambassador soon.
And soon watches the footage, the clinical eviscerations, the bodies of the colonists, and remains utterly detached. He calls the recording very imaginative and slander, and demands his immediate release and permission to leave Earth.
Herringale, who is fighting to maintain his own composure, finds himself thinking of his two daughters. They were the exact age of some of the victims in the footage.
So he presses the ambassador. He wants a specific reason for the careful evisceration of so many females and the concurrent careful preservation of their reproductive organs. This was the core question. What was the biological motive?
And Suen just maintained his perfect, arrogant detachment. He refused to provide any rationale. The Pitar veneer held right up until the point of no return.
Herringale, his patience finally gone, informs soon that the recording would be broadcast globally at 6 p.m. GMT, followed by an official announcement of mobilization of war.
The consequence was immediate and absolute. Sue and his staff were declared prisoners of war, their diplomatic immunity revoked due to the severity of the crime.
And Sun died fighting the guards as he tried to flee the embassy, confirming that underlying aggression that was always beneath the flawless exterior.
And following the global broadcast of the atrocity, especially that sickening focus on the reproductive organs, the human mass psychology that the Thranx worried so much about, it instantly swung into violent action.
A mob stormed the Zurich embassy, and the remaining Pitar there died resisting them. It was this swift, visceral display of global human rage and grief.
The definitive strategic reaction, though, came from the Thranx. The sources describe their response as subdued fury, which is just a perfect Thranx descriptor for absolute rage expressed methodically.
And they were particularly sensitive to the method of the Pitar attack.
That sensitivity stemmed from their deep-seated culture, right? Thranx society arose from this ancient line that venerated a single egg-laying queen.
Exactly. So any violation of the reproductive system, whether it was human or Thranx, was a profound cultural and biological insult. It set a ripple of rage through every hive.
It was an attack on the fundamental principle of continuity in life itself. It went beyond mere species boundaries.
Initially, there was intense debate within the Thranx Council. Some argued for pure non-intervention, reasoning that the Pitar War does not involve us.
They argued they should just focus entirely on the persistent threat of the AN and remain neutral, like the Quilp and the Anapatha, especially since humans were often seen as ungrateful and, prone to fickle diplomatic swings.
But the senior strategists, led by Diane Hajudraprox and a specialist named Debrel Janov, they saw this not as an internal human problem, but as a strategic opening.
They argued for calculated intervention to gain long-term valuable allies against the AN.
And they acknowledged that while individual humans could be reliable, their mass psychology is unstable. They were too easily swayed by panic, by xenophobia, or by superficial attraction.
So their conclusion, they must make them like us, was a pretty cynical strategic calculation aimed at stabilization.
Precisely. It meant tethering humanity to the Thranx axis through mutual combat and dependency. By proving their unwavering loyalty now, when humanity was grieving and desperate, they would instill a level of trust that would override any future swings of human suspicion or fickleness.
They viewed the alliance as an investment in neutralizing the AN, using human military capacity as the counterweight.
And their diplomacy was timed with ruthless, impressive precision. As the human armada was assembling in Pitarian space, a Thranx delegation, led by the elderly Diant High-Jirgerbrox, arrived to communicate directly with the human fleet.
She proposed a formal military alliance, arguing that since the matter was specifically about the destruction of Treetrunk, it was best to discuss the strategic implications with those intimately involved.
Meaning the admirals and field marshals preparing for war, not some distant diplomats back on Earth.
Admiral Yergiz and Field Marshal McCunn, the human officers in command, were profoundly impressed. The Thranx timing, their precision, their willingness to commit their own resources without hesitation, they accepted the alliance.
And that formally established the human Thranx axis, forged not in friendship, but in mutual hatred of a common, incomprehensible enemy.
So, with the human Thranx axis formalized, the combined armada arrives in Pitarian space, ready for a major confrontation.
Yet, the Pitar offered this strange, almost passive resistance. They didn't attack the arriving fleet, nor had they launched any counterattack against Earth or any of the colonies.
Their strategy became pretty clear. All Pitar military might, including a substantial number of reserve ships, was concentrated solely on the defense of their two homeworlds, the Twin Worlds.
Which just reinforces the idea that their objective was never territorial conquest or strategic domination. It was something internal, biological, and it required the neutralization of the human species, specifically its reproductive capacity.
This created an immediate, desperate stalemate that lasted for 10 brutal months. The Pitar were determined and perfectly entrenched.
They met every single human offensive thrust with an equivalent immediate response. They thwarted all attempts to land troops or even englobe one of the Twin Worlds. They were absolute masters of defense.
The technological deadlock was incredibly costly. High-energy beams were met with perfectly calibrated deflectors. Particle guns were shunted harmlessly into space.
The sources emphasize the heavy human casualties. Hundreds and thousands of lives lost, while the Pitar suffered virtually none, thanks to that concentrated defense.
And any requests to parley were met not with negotiation, but with strident animosity and general contempt for the human species as a whole.
The Pitar simply insisted that the humans leave the sacred system of the Twin Worlds. Their arrogance was profound. They seemingly believed they were untouchable because of their superior defensive tech.
The nature of the conflict demanded a radical solution. The human Thranx armada just couldn't afford a war of attrition against an enemy suffering zero casualties.
And this necessity led directly to a collaborative research effort, designed specifically to break the Pitar's defensive perimeter.
And this collaboration, this is what proved the true value of the alliance. It leveraged the complementary intellectual strengths of the two species.
The Thranx, with their methodical, meticulous nature, they excelled at finding improvements in existing engineering and other practical applications that humans often overlook.
Which perfectly complemented the human strength in conceptualizing basic scientific breakthroughs, the initial theoretical leaps.
And the result was the revolutionary SE-CAM weapon system, unveiled by a physicist named Humanx-Pitar. And this technology is a prime example of turning a fundamental scientific reality like gravity into a tactical weapon.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics, starting with the delivery system. The Sting ship.
Right. Sting ships were small, two-person vessels, designed to be carried in huge numbers inside larger craft. They relied entirely on agility, not on defensive screens, and they carried a single miniature KK drive-powered munition.
And that munition was the SE-CAM, small craft carrying autonomous munition.
The shell itself housed a sizable thermonuclear device, fitted behind a tiny, powerful KK drive unit. A drive unit that was miniaturized to a degree previously thought impossible, thanks to that combined Thranx and human engineering.
So how does this KK drive interact with the target vessel? That's the key.
Right? The genius is in the overdrive sequence. Normally, a KK drive warps space-time to create a gravity well, and the ship moves forward by falling into that well.
Okay.
When the SE-CAM shell is launched, its KK drive is programmed to warp into deliberate and irrevocable overdrive. This process, rather than enabling flight, turns the munition into a sudden, massive, and highly unstable gravity focus.
And because the Pitar vessels are also using KK drives, they're constantly generating their own smaller gravity wells.
Correct. The SCCAM, in its overdrive state, is automatically attracted to the nearest gravity well of size, which is the corresponding drive field of the Pitar vessel. The sudden excessive gravitational distortion created by the suicidal SCCAM drive would simply rend both asunder. It just tears the Pitar vessel apart.
But wait a second, if the Pitar is sophisticated enough to recognize this threat, couldn't they just shut down their own KK drives to eliminate the gravity well? Wouldn't that neutralize the targeting mechanism?
That is the secondary genius. That's the checkmate scenario.
Yeah.
A ship's primary defensive screens are powered by the enormous energy output of its KK drive. So if the Pitar shut down their drive to eliminate the gravity well, their defensive screens also shut down instantly,
leaving them completely vulnerable to the raw, unhindered thermonuclear device carried by the SCCAM.
by either choice, maintain the drive and be torn apart by gravitational shear, or shut down the drive and be hit by a nuclear explosion. The Pitar vessel is destroyed or disabled. There's no escape.
The SCCAM system, deployed simultaneously across the wide sphere of conflict, finally broke the stalemate. The human Thranx armada began to destroy or disable the Pitar vessels.
It altered the course of the battle and enabled troops to finally land on the twin worlds. The Thranx, having secured the space lanes, participated only as observers in the subsequent ground war.
The alliance had proven its worth in the harshest possible environment. It was formally cemented through these mutual, pragmatic trade-offs. The Thranx provided information on frigid planets unsuitable for them, but perfect for human colonization.
And humans reciprocated with equally valuable intelligence. It was a partnership based on strategic self-interest, forged in the fire of shared combat.
But the conflict, as always, has observers. The final source tells us that the AN are established reptilian enemies who had been locked in that 350-year dance of disharmony with the Thranx. They watched these developments unhappily.
They recognized that they were unable to challenge the maturing human Thranx axis directly. They knew they couldn't win a head-on conflict against this powerful new coalition.
So instead, the AN planned to use their formidable, subtle skills in shrewd manipulation of opportune circumstances.
Their goal was to exploit the remaining suspicion between the two allies, hoping to drive them into open conflict. The AN recognized that human mass psychology was still susceptible to those irrational swings, and that the alliance, while militarily powerful, remained fragile at its core. We began with a horrific, unexpected silence that fell over 600,000 colonists on Treetrunk, and we end with the establishment of this interstellar military axis, defined by advanced technology and shared brutal experience.
The essential insight driven home by the sources is just the catastrophic danger of superficiality. The Pitar were everything humans instinctively wanted: physical perfection, immediate gratification, unconditional concessions.
And this appearance masked a calculated genocidal intent driven by these unknown, disturbing biological goals: the systematic theft of human female reproductive organs.
You contrast that with the Thranx. Physically, they were considered repulsive, communicatively difficult, and bound by all these frustrating procedures.
Yet, they proved to be spiritually compatible, strategically indispensable in a crisis, and offered a lasting partnership built on methodical respect and mutual survival against existential threats. The partnership was difficult, but in the end, it was reliable.
For you, the learner, this deep dive provides a really potent lesson in strategic knowledge acquisition. The information that comes easily, the immediate concessions, the flawless presentation, that should often be viewed with the deepest suspicion.
True value, like the Thranx's loyalty and their engineering genius, it often requires overcoming your own cognitive bias and investing in complex, initially uncomfortable relationships.
The Human-Thranx alliance was an alliance of necessity, forged in the fires of the Pitarian War, and held together by the pragmatic need to survive the galactic landscape.
But as the AN, the masters of subtle conflict, observe, this new axis is not an unbreakable shield.
So here is our final provocative thought for you to consider. The AN planned to exploit the inherent instability of human mass psychology. Given that humans were so easily fooled by the Pitar's beauty and so prone to violent xenophobic swings, as shown by the Amazon hive attack and the Zurich mob, what is the most likely fissure point the AN will target? Will it be cultural, political, or economic?
And how long can a necessary strategic alliance last before external forces exploit the remaining deep-seated cracks of suspicion? Treetrunk proved that the most dangerous enemy is the one you happily invited in. The question now is whether the Allies can overcome their internal biases before the next master manipulator arrives.
Until the next deep dive, stay curious.